Welcome to Rig på Viden, a podcast about research in finance, investing and economics. This episode is produced in collaboration with Deloitte. Deloitte helps Rig på Viden get a practical perspective on academic research while also getting inspiration. This explorative collaboration bridges the gap between academics and practitioners, and we really appreciate Deloitte's support of expanding academic knowledge.
This time in the studio, I have the pleasure of interviewing two people, not only the professor as usual, but this podcast we're also going to have a practical view on how the academic side. We have Brian and Henrik in the studio, but I will let you introduce yourself. Henrik, could you start?
Yes, thank you, and nice to be here. My name is Henrik Knak. I'm a director in Deloitte in our supply chain division here in the Danish practice. Work globally, but situated in the Copenhagen office. I'm a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from DTU by background, and have a bachelor from CBS in Organization Development, and another one in Marketing. And then I added the various stuff over time, and lately from Cambridge University, Sustainable Economy and Sustainability and Circular Economy Strategies was the name of the course.
And pleasure to be here. My name is Vejrum Waehrens, and I'm a professor of sustainable production and supply chain at the Department of Materials and Production, Aalborg University. And in recent years, I've been mainly concerned with the industrial transition towards smart and sustainable production, a work which is ongoing in direct collaboration with industry, and often under the national program, Manufacturing Academy of Denmark, which has been ongoing for the past 10 years now. And I'm also a vice chair of the Academy of Technical Sciences, the standing working group on future manufacturing.
Can you maybe tell us more about how did you got that interest in the very beginning of working with production and supply chain?
Well, it's a fairly long story, but I would say from my perspective, supply chain is the main motor of value creation in modern industry, but it's also a major driver of value loss and resource waste when we don't have things in control. Companies today have major resource commitments and dependencies in their supply chains, and there's really a increasing need for understanding and controlling the processes in supply chains in order to develop our modern companies of today. So that's why I think supply chain is the most exciting place to be today in my line of work. So.
And Henrik, I also know that you work with digitalization of supply chain. And the first thought I, of course, thought about was blockchain. And we actually also have a podcast episode with some of your colleagues, Jonas Svejstrup, about blockchain.
Yes.
So, but this is, I think, already a year ago or more. So, would you say that blockchain is that the fastest digital mover within supply chain, or?
Well, blockchain has been hyped for quite a while, and I think like RFID back around 2000 when that got hyped, it starts to differentiate and start to move into different specifics that it's been applied for. And I think blockchain is on that same journey where it started big and with a lot of thoughts and ideas, but it's not that easy to implement, and it does, from a sustainability point of view, require quite a lot of energy if you take it all the way out to Bitcoins and how you use it in that direction. You can use it with less effort from an energy and the whole way of the algorithms behind it, the way that work. I'm not an expert at all like Jonas, so if you want to know more about that, you should definitely talk to Jonas. But we leverage some of the capabilities in blockchain in some of our projects. I think he might have talked about the one we did for a meat producer that is exporting a lot of meat to China, and China have some quite severe asks about point of origin and track and trace. And for those purposes, blockchain is a very good mechanism to make sure that there's proof of concept, proof of origin, proof of track and trace. If you have a cold chain like you need for food, then you can also prove that the temperature has been right all the way out to where the product is being delivered. So from that point of view, blockchain does have a good application. We're using it currently at another client where we are transforming that client into a new setup. But rather, I would say, go back to your original question. Blockchain, yes, interesting technology, been a bit hyped, now going more into specifics. What we experience in the daily life of a consulting company is that digitalization to some extent is a mix. It's never one technology. So one client I'm working with currently is a global implementation of an advanced planning system. And you can discuss whether planning within the terms of digitalization is just an old-fashioned way of IT or whether it's smart. But what we're seeing is that these, I would say, more old-fashioned tools are starting to apply some of the more advanced digitalization activities or elements, such as artificial intelligence, for example, or big data analytics. And some of those technologies are being applied in this project. So, for example, if you have a situation where you sell your product around the world to different customer groups, AI can help you group the different customers into a number of characteristics that makes it easier to do demand planning, for example, using statistics. So there's a number of applications that artificial intelligence can be used for.
Yeah, so it's actually more about using all the data as we get, because we get a lot more data
every year.
Yeah, every year. We're also going to talk about supply chain costing. So Brianna, I hope you maybe start a bit from scratch and elaborate what does supply chain costing mean when you are doing your research within this field. What are you focusing on?
But maybe first of all to bridge to Henrik's digitization agenda. I think it's certainly clear that modern and advanced supply chains today are supported by decision support mechanisms, transparency enabling technologies, and blockchain is one important element in that portfolio of different technologies, and it's certainly to be reckoned with in many circumstances. For example, in terms of establishing the digital passport, material passport, which is quite a lot in focus at the EU level at the moment, and we expect legislation to be passed within this domain, and here the blockchain could certainly be an important element. But I think, first of all, it's important to ask, what is the problem before we start to choose the hammer that we apply to solving the problem. I think that's one quite important thing. And right now, there is a lot of talk about blockchain and artificial intelligence and other technologies. But first of all, we need to get back to the problem. And if we look for our rationale for starting working with supply chain costing, then it's obvious, as you say, that we get more and more data available. But most of this data is oriented towards daily operations. So will the goods arrive, and quality data and things like this. And this is very good. But we also need to support the strategic and tactical decisions that we need to make in the supply chain context. For example, when are we going to introduce a new supplier? When are we going to establish a new factory in a new country, in a new location? So big decisions like this. And here we really need tools that can enable us to assess a complex supply chain, bring in the different uncertainty factors, and also allow us to build in some of this structural resilience, which enable us to react to situation that may happen to us at some point in time, without getting directly into predicting what is going to happen to us. So I think it's in this context that we have started working with supply chain costing as a concept, namely to enlighten strategic supply chain decisions. So we're not interested in the exact costs, but we're interested in understanding the consequences of our decisions.
And the cost drivers, so that we can prioritize. Supply chain management is very much about prioritizing, because you cannot do all. It's a holistic job to manage a supply chain. And if you want to manage everything, you'll die. So this is also what we're doing in this project. It's very much about moving from the old way of working with planning, where you basically try to plan everything and optimize it, going into making the solution automate a lot of the optimization. And what you do instead is you focus on the alerts. You focus on the things that doesn't fit in, the things that are not going automated. And here, digitalization can be an interesting lever to get involved with when it comes to a costing element as well. So understanding the different costs in real life, getting those measured, for example, using IoT. So you take some of the execution you have in your supply chain flow and get those data coming back to what is really the cost. And that's a key challenge for us today, because we do have cost, we do know the cost, but we think we know them. We know them from a theoretical point of view, we know when we get the bill, but what really happened during that process from when we shipped it until it reached the customer, and all the costs that arrived during that ride, they will never be the same for two like products that are sent to different locations, and they will drive different costs.
And of course we can assess the material cost and the work that has gone into processing something, labor, but for many years we've been talking about a hidden factory. And this basically represents all the costs that are not directly visible to our eyes, but are related to, for example, auditing suppliers, selecting suppliers, bringing in and upgrading a new supplier. So all this work that is not directly related to the direct activity, but have this indirect relationship with the value creation.
Could we maybe have an example of that? Let's say I'm a company, I want to change the supplier. What could be an example of indirect cost that it would be difficult to say, to quantify the real cost?
You would need to set up the system with the supplier. You would need to qualify the supplier. You would need to bring your supplier into your systems. You would need to align with the supplier. You would need to coordinate quality with the supplier. So there's a number of different activities that are not directly related to the activity itself, but are related to establishing the foundations for actually performing the activity.
So bringing certainty to the indirect cost, Henrik, would you say that's a big part of working with supply chain management?
Very much indeed. I would say, especially if you look 10, 15 years ago, where complexity management was a big focus. I think some of the learnings we got from there, where we focused on how can we take some of these indirect costs, which in the factory is also the other kind. For example, you have a cold chain in a food processing company, and that cold chain cost is typically equally spread out to the different items. Maybe by revenue, so there's some fair allocation, but not by cost, and definitely not by who actually drives that cold cost. So one customer we worked with, they had a revenue of, let's say, less than 10 billion Danish kroner. More than 1 billion kroner was indirect and not allocated correctly. So when we did this ABC or Pareto curve of the different products, and we started to reallocate this 1 billion to the right products, not just equally to each, but to the ones that was actually driving the cost. We had a lot of A products moving from a profitability point of view to being very profitable with a lot of discount to some customers into actually loss-giving products. And what we could see is that from a profitability, if you don't do it by revenue, but you do it by profitability, their profit went up to more than 220% profit and fell down to the 100% that they had after a year. So there's a lot of loss, as you mentioned in the beginning, Brian, in a supply chain. But if you don't know where it is, and you don't know if you just allocate it equally out to all your products, all your customers, that is an issue, and you can't optimize because you don't know where to focus.
And a further element is that the supply chain is not standing still.
No, it's changing every day.
It's evolving every single day, and that just increases the complexity, but it also increases the need for actually understanding the dynamics in your supply chain into depth. And this is where there's quite a lot of work still to be done in order for us to push forward with building efficient and effective supply chains. I guess during COVID we had this need of establishing very secure and very efficient cold chains to distribute the vaccines. And I guess the need for monitoring the performance of this cold chain throughout the entire process was evident. And of course, the disruptions that can happen to this cold chain is that the truck breaks down, or the nurse opens the freezer too early, or whatever. There can be many disruptions at different stages of the supply chain.
I worked with one pharma company. They had the issue, of course, with moving into Russia, that the border control added an extra tax on their truck before they could enter. And it was quite a big tax. So the company had to pay or go back with the products and there wasn't sufficient petrol to keep the cold down. And so you had to pay to get moving on.
Yeah, so this is actually an example where some of the leadership should actually act possibly quite quickly and get an update of a small part of the supply chain changing and see, okay, is it still profitable to trading with Russia?
This is, of course, a very special case.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before neither after that. So, But in a cold chain environment, that is an issue, of course, that time is limited. And you need to react fast, obviously.
I actually gave you both some homework as well here, because usually I'm the one asking all the questions, but you've been very good from the very beginning, actually dialoguing with each other, which is very great. But I think it could be quite great to maybe hear a practitioner ask the professor a question, and maybe afterwards the professor ask a practitioner. So Henrik,
yeah, it would be fun.
Yeah. So Henrik, do you have any questions for the professor now?
Well, if we need to keep it within the frame of what we're talking about today, disruptions and supply chain cost, one of the things I've been thinking about that could be of interest is that when you have all these disruptions and you need to fit your company to be able to cope with it, from a costing perspective, it's often about going through scenarios, discussing consequences. Where do you see that getting those costs better understood and being able to measure them in a way where we can actually also even simulate impacts or suspected impacts that would be of interest?
Of course, the idea that we can predict the exact outcome of something is not relevant. But we can predict the direction of different things. So we can predict that within this domain we expect something to happen in this direction. And this will start to prepare us as a company. So I think that there is a lot of work going into understanding the pain points in your supply chain, mapping your supply chain, maybe also going to the stage of starting to model your supply chain in order to understand the key pain points in your supply chain. And then you can start to work with those pain points, not because something exact is going to happen, but because we expect something to happen within this domain. And the better prepared we can be within this domain, the better we can respond to something when it actually happens. So we have alternatives. We know what to do if something happens. We have a capability to act. We have made agreements with alternative supply routes or whatever is needed. So I think, yes, you're right. There's a lot of work that needs to go into simple mapping and understanding of the supply chain as a basis for knowing it better, and then we can start to model it as well and start to derive costs. And
it's one of the big challenges we have when we work with clients, where they move from classic capacity optimization in sales and operations planning into the more financial driven integrated business planning, where it's not just about balancing the capacity with the demand, but it's very much also about, when you do that, you have a number of things you can do, and you will be limited in either delivering enough because you can't produce, or you have to prioritize one customer, one product to another. And doing it solely based on capacity and demand is not enough. You need to see the economical impact of choosing one from the other. And there you need all the cost measured and carved out.
Jamen, thank you for that question and the back answer. And Brian, I also promised you would have the chance.
I should ask a question going into this digitization domain, which I think is also quite interesting. I would like to hear in your experience, Henrik, how far have the companies come with supporting strategic and tactical decisions with data and analytics? So you're talking about technologies supporting data acquisition and analytics tools as well. So how far have industry come with actually adopting these?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's a bit like everything else. There is a Pareto curve also for this. So there's a few that tries to lead and then go forward in different industries, and then there are the majority of them, which is fighting even to get data. And get that insight to do the prioritization and understand their costs. So rugbrødsarbejdet, as we call it in Denmark, that foundation of maybe the big volume of a lot of projects is still working with getting beyond the standards and getting fixed, get all the things fixed to do what you should be doing. Yeah. And then there's just a few that really goes beyond. And what we're seeing is that also sustainability drives a lot of those that are actually in front, understanding not just the impact from a financial point of view, but also understanding the impact from a sustainability point of view. And that's where it's interesting to get the data from your supplier network, for example. And there are more and more tools that enables that use web crawling techniques to see how companies are linked, understanding their supplier network tier 1 to tier 3, forward to go down and understand where then the issues from a sustainability point of view that will impact the supply chain, our customers, our products, our production and so forth.
Yeah, thank you both very much. So no exception this time. Ri Pawin will also dive into a research article, and Brian, you wrote an article called Supply Chain Costing. Of course, it's about supply chain, and the first case, it's about a company, and they were trying to reduce working capital, and they did it by replacing some internal production by some external suppliers because they have some cheaper variable costs. But the plan backfired a bit because there were some additional indirect costs, and therefore it actually ended up that the purchasing department, they increased the inventory level, which in the very end increased the working capital as well. So you mentioned that companies, they should not only tend to look at cost models in their decision-making process, but they should also take system dynamics and uncertainty / options into consideration. So what does it mean in taking these two fields into consideration?
As we mentioned, the supply chains are never stable. They are evolving all the time. So there is a inbuilt dynamic into how things are done. So routes will change, suppliers will change, locations will change, performance criteria will change with time. So they are forever evolving, and in the latter years we have experienced, for example, with the Suez Canal being blocked for a while, or Chinese ports being closed down. We have examples of situations where we need to react as a company and find alternatives. So options are a means of building in alternatives into your preferred way of doing things in the supply chain. So shifting to a different supplier, for example, the ability to shift to a different transport mode or different port of shipping if that is needed, or shifting your demand to a different product if the product that is actually asked for is out of stock. So all these different elements are options, and you can build your options into your supply chain configuration. It has a cost because it doesn't come for free to have a alternative source, for example, a alternative supplier or a alternative transport mode. It comes with a cost, so it has to be balanced. You have to balance the cost and potential gains that you can have from having this flexibility. So this is where options comes into the supply chain concept as a concept that will enable us to deal with the disruptions that are likely to happen to us at some point in time. But again, back to the issue, we don't know what exactly will happen. So we need to work with a range of different options, and we need to figure out which options are more important to our particular business.
Yeah. So Henrik, do you maybe have a comment on that?
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah.
And that's also what makes it so exciting to be in supply chain. I mean, it's not a quick fix or a static thing that you can just make one optimal solution for and then you're gone. This is something that changes every day, every second nearly, which I think makes it interesting. Some years back, we developed a complexity analyzer for Danfoss, where they decided to simplify the business in a number of ranges, and it basically took out data from all the different SAP instances around the world and collected that into one big database. You could say, okay, we should have done it with the supply chain costs as the key lever for selecting the right things to optimize on. But we realized that getting those costs was really challenging. They changed all the time, and also they weren't necessarily good proxies for the right decisions to make. So instead we used a point. So we gave points to things that were not good complexity. So if you had small batch sizes, if you had specialized products designed for customers, different times of one-offs, tried to give that bad points, a lot of points. So we basically added up per product, per customer, per channel, and so forth. But also went into the supply chain, looked at the different elements you have, all the way back to suppliers, and then gave points to everything. And that we used every month to review the whole portfolio and look at how can we then focus on the ones that are not creating enough profit from a point of view, complexity point of view from the analyzer, and then we started to look more into the actual cost from there on. And that worked very well as an intermediate solution for bridging that you can't get the costs as they should be. So you make an artificial point solution instead, this analyzer, and then you can focus and go into depth with
this point system. It sounds quite interesting. Was this more a one-time case again, or is it actually a method that can be applied for several companies?
It's also been applied at let's just call it a big enzyme company that also have used it to focus on their portfolio. They did it every 3 months, so it was not a part of the S&OP process where you then also review your portfolio. So they did it more on a quarterly basis.
So I suppose this is not any special news in the research field.
Yeah, I think complexity is a bit like lean. Lean has had a season where it was hype and everybody did it, but now it's just something you need to do. It's a cleaning thing that's obvious. You need to do it and focus on it every day in what you do. And complexity was a bit hyped also when you look back in 2005 to 2012, 15. But then it got out of focus again. I think with all the disruptions and the more the systems are able to differentiate things, creating all the data pools that gives you a lot of ways of looking at different angles to the problem of supply chain. There you need to focus again on your complexity because things become too complex. Lego nearly killed themselves back in, when was it, 2005, 2008, because of having too broad a portfolio and focusing on everything. They halved that portfolio over a year or two, and that saved the company basically. Now most likely they are into expanding again because there are so many options for sales and product development to grow into, and that's a classic supply chain challenge. That sales are very creative, and we love this because that's what makes business grow. But it's also creating a lot of dynamics and complexity in supply chain.
I think what is different today compared to 2005 and that period is that they have today very, very strong platforms.
Yes, data platforms.
They have a very strong material platform, they have a very strong production platform, and they have a very strong product platform. And the interaction between the three platforms are quite well developed in the Lego system. And that's basically what makes it possible for Lego to do what they do and maybe to expand the product portfolio as they're doing at the moment. So I think that's one big change for them, at least, as I see it as an external observer, of course.
Yeah, obviously learned from that period. That's obvious. Yeah. Agree.
If we just should take one step above in the helicopter, now we talked about your research here, supply chain costing, that case you have made, but that's already 10 years old, and as we mentioned a couple of times, it's a field that's actually a lot of changes into the industry, and I'm a bit curious to hear, within the research field and the academic perspective, what are the focus in the moment for you and your colleagues when you research about supply chain?
I think there's many different dimensions. So one dimension is bringing in new purposes, and one of these purposes is sustainability. And it comes in alongside with quality, cost, delivery performance, and all the other performance criteria that we need to live up to. And one important thing there is how do we balance these different performance objectives with each other. So this is one key domain. Another key domain is bringing in the technologies that Henrik mentioned at the beginning and making them work in a supply chain context. And then, of course, we also have the complexity agenda, which I think is still quite important and related to this whole issue of building resilience into your supply chain. And I think there's actually two elements to this. So with complexity, you can choose to reduce it. And I think that's certainly one way to go, and we should try to do that every day. But we must also accept that complexity is just a fact of life in a supply chain setting. And therefore, we also need to build robust and agile supply chain systems that will actually allow us to deal with the complexity in there. And I think the work that we did 10 years ago on supply chain costing is actually one small element and one small tool in this direction. So I certainly still think that the idea has good value, and
Yes, I'm sure we consider.
Maybe I can comment on that, because every year in EDA operations management, we do a survey amongst the 3,500 members I think we have, and last year when Corona got hot, really number 1 or 2 on the list of what they really wanted was better demand planning. And this year again, I think it was number 2 on the list, better demand planning. And we had an event some months ago where a COO commented on, yes, it's very nice having a good demand plan, but it's never right. It will always fail. So I would rather have a supply chain that is agile and able to adapt to the real world that happens every day, because it will never be like we plan. And that, I think, is a good statement. We need to be agile. We need to have a company set up that is able to cope with that kind of dynamics that we have in the market every day.
Yeah. Yes. And of course, that's where the sales and operations planning process becomes quite important, because it becomes that forum where you have the opportunity to meet across functions and somehow deal with some of the inherent logics of the different functional areas in a company. So sales has one agenda and one estimate of how the market will go. The production have a different perspective. Product development have an idea about when to launch products, and so on and so forth. And these all need to be aligned. And the sales and operations planning forum is an important mechanism for this. And it's one of the areas where this supply chain costing also has an important value.
Yeah. So I would just thank you both, Henrik and Brian, that would like to attend here at Rig på Viden.
Pleasure.
It's been fun. Thank you for having us.
Tak for, at du lyttede med til Rig på Viden. Jeg håber, at du lærte noget, og hvis du nu synes godt af vores podcast, så kan du støtte os ved at følge den på Spotify eller skrive en anbefaling på iTunes. Inde på LinkedIn, der kan du følge André Thormand, Benjamin Somofen eller Henrik Foged Rasmussen. på genhør.